Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the webinar on stock throughput insurance. All right, without further ado, we'll start talking about stock throughput coverage. So what is it? It's really a combination of 5 different policies we have here, all into one policy. And it can include any or all of these as necessary. Ocean cargo. Some underwriters do require ocean cargo, but it's not actually every underwriter. Some, as long as there's some form of cargo in place, could be air cargo, can be rail cargo, can be motor truck cargo. There has to be some movement, which sort of generates that throughput element and triggers it to get into the marine market. And then sort of underpinning that, and really the driving force today is all about the stock coverage, stock in storage. We'll talk a bit more about this in a minute, but it really is giving some new answers to a very tough property marketplace when you can take the stock element out of a risk, particularly if they don't own the buildings themselves, and put that in a stock throughput policy. But it's one policy that can encompass basically any one or all 5 of these in one go. Sometimes it's called supply chain insurance. There's another variation of supply chain insurance we'll talk about separately. But this really is the key to it. It's about how does something happen during the supply chain. I think with the information going on right now, or the changes going on tariffs, the word supply chain has suddenly become perhaps much more of a buzzword than it has been in the past. But the stock throughput is on occasion called supply chain insurance. So again, it's ocean marine, inland marine, air cargo, storage, and reshipment in one policy. And this is one of the interesting parts. There's a lot of products where we may create the raw material here in the United States or in some third-party location, and then maybe move it down perhaps to Asia. In my example here, I'm taking it down to Central America, and have it turned into a finished product, which is again then shipped back. Again, tariffs may affect this, but this is a very common pattern, particular for things like clothing, blue jeans, anything in that range where the raw material here is in one country. It's made up in a second and then returned to the USA or sent to the US or Canada after that. And one of the things that's a little odd about this is it actually charges you a higher rate, but it gives you a lower cost. Let me try and explain. Let's say we've got $100,000 worth of raw material going from here to Central America, and we charge a 10-cent rate. So we've got $1,000 of premium on that. If we then ship it back again under a traditional cargo policy, you're going to pay another 10-cent rate. The value will have gone up a little bit, but basically you're paying 20 cents on that 100,000, so $2,000. If you do a stock throughput, you might find that the cargo element of the rate is 15 cents. But the good part about that is it's only charged once. So instead of paying $2,000 for this $100,000 shipment, using my very simple example, you'd only be paying $1,500. Is $500 going to make a huge difference? No, but now make it $1 million. I make it $1 million 5 or 6 or 10 times a year. Now you're talking about some significant differences. In addition, again, we'll talk more about this, unavailable perils. Some of the facilities in other countries may not be up to US standards, and it might be difficult to get windstorm, flood, quake, water damage, those types of perils in that local environment. Again, the stock throughput policy, because it gives you that storage in a warehouse, in a manufacturing plant, can give you the perils that you would not traditionally see in a property policy. It addresses full exposures from raw materials to final sale. I'll show you a couple of examples in a minute. You can do valuation clauses. You can be very creative on this. Most commonly, it's selling price, which can address a lost profit. If we make something up and it's worth $100 once it's been manufactured, but we sell it for 200, we've got $100 lost profit if it's destroyed, and it can be built into that selling price. You can do a wholesale, you can do a retail, you can do a customized selling price. It's a great mechanism. Let's say that it cost you $100 to buy those goods, but if you needed to replace them, it's $150 today. Not terribly shocking in today's environment. The loss of profits, sorry, the selling price valuation clause could give you what it would cost to replace the product rather than what you're going to get to sell it. So you can be very flexible in this, and even can write multiple clauses in there to say, all right, on selling price, unless it's not sold, or selling price unless this happens. You can do a lot of varieties here. Again, raw materials or stock in process, it could be replacement cost or selling price, less any unincurred costs. But with tariffs doing what they are, you can say, all right, again, I've got that product that I bought for $100, but it's going to cost me $150 to replace it, and then I'm going to sell it for $300. What's my margin there? And again, we can build that into a valuation clause. You can be pretty well as creative as you can, and without increasing the moral hazard to the underwriters. They're not going to pay you more than the product's worth and when it's sold, but you can be very creative on these valuation clauses. Here's just one view of this. This is really a factory, so we're going to import local purchase, sorry, can we import purchase of raw materials from the top right, stock before it's manufactured. On the top left, it's a local purchase of supplies or raw materials, again, come into a factory. They're going to be stored, those products are going to be stored away before they're made up into the finished products. And then they could be shipped overseas, transported to the final customer in the overseas destination, or distributed domestically. So again, overseas storage, you're going to see that air cargo or ship cargo, containerized or bulk, or whatever method there is. Whereas local distribution, obviously more frequently by truck. It doesn't really matter in here. You've got all these varieties, could be rail distribution, got all these varieties again in one map. Slightly different view of this. This is more the sort of supply chain method. I will disclaim here that I do not have a daughter. I don't have a sister. I was never brought up knowing anything about Barbies. But as I'm told, this is how Mattel manufactures Barbie. I should also disclaim we'd have nothing to do with Mattel's insurance. But oil comes from Saudi Arabia, goes over to Taiwan. Molds are made here in the United States. All that shipped to China for labor. Hair comes from Japan, nylon hair from Japan. It's assembled in Hong Kong and finally shipped here to the US consumer. The Barbie might be worth $20, $30, $40 when it gets to the US consumer, but you've got all these parts in there that if the molds were destroyed, then I've lost the ability to sell Barbie. Because I can't produce them. And again, you can build your valuation clause to take in this whole process, all the shipments, all the transits in between those various places, including US distribution to the warehouse. And whilst it's in every one of these warehouses or manufacturing facilities. I do want to just go back one step to that factory. You'll see a blue arrow to the right here that talks about a process clause. And again, not every stock throughput has this, but vast majority of stock throughput policies say we're not going to cover you for any damage caused whilst that product's actually being worked on. So if we have blue jeans and we want to dye them black, and in the process of dyeing them black, the damage was done to those blue jeans in that dyeing process, that wouldn't actually give you a trigger of coverage. They'd be fine after that process is completed and they're stored. It's fine before the process is made, started, but actually within the actual process time, most stock throughput policies will not give you coverage. Generally, it's not a big issue because the values of an individual items are typically small. If you do get something major, a single large item or a handful of large single items, that may be an issue that you need to deal with, because obviously to assemble something that is highly complex, piece of machinery of some variety, and highly expensive, that could be a long period of time, and the process clause may take out a lot of that coverage. They are manuscripts, so you've got to look at each individual one to see what's excluded, but clearly it's something you need to be aware in the stock throughput policy. What are the disadvantages of stock throughput? Can be challenging to underwrite. There's usually some pretty detailed information required. And today, quite often you're going to have actuarial input, which slows down the process. Some underwriters will give you an indication subject to that actuarial involvement. Some say, no, I've got to send this out for modeling. Really depends on how much stock you have. The balance between the cargo doesn't really need modeling. It's that stock element, that the stock in the warehouse, that needs the actuarial modeling. Also depends where you are. It's difficult to find places today that are not cat exposed, but clearly if you're down in South Florida, for example, the modeling becomes absolutely critical. Perhaps some other areas of the north might be a little quieter from a modeling point of view. Advantages: it's in the marine cargo market. It's generally exempt from rate and reform filing and non-emitted. The prices are typically lower than the property market is today, just for the storage. In many cases with the stock throughput, we can include the cargo and the property insurance, stock property insurance all in one go, and be lower priced than just the property part of the risk. You get some cost savings leveraging the bulk purchasing power of the in charge supply chain. You're buying one policy for everything rather than segmenting it apart. And again, the effect of claims, the loss ratio is going to be offset by that consolidated premiums. Probably, to me, one of the most important parts is the gaps in coverage between policies. If you had a motor truck cargo policy, a separate ocean cargo policy, and a property policy, and you have a container that starts in one country, gets on a train, goes to the port, gets on a ocean cargo voyage, is offloaded at one end, is put on a truck at this end and delivered to the warehouse, you've got 3, possibly 4 different policies involved in that process. And if when you sealed the product in the container, it looked fine, but at the other end it's damaged, you could have a argument between the policy as to which one should be paying the loss. Where did that damage occur? Was it at the ocean? Was it loading? Was it unloading? You know, having one policy means you don't have that dispute. Typically, again, deductibles are lower, particularly for cat perils, and they're usually a fixed dollar amount as opposed to a percentage of value. Again, you can negotiate percentage, but most stock throughput underwriters tend to use fixed value deductibles. Again, a very important part of the stock throughput policy is that it can include wind, flood, and quake. Virtually everyone includes wind. Vast majority will include flood and quake. You can buy that in or out. But again, if we've got a hurricane coming through somewhere here in the south, and we have a loss that's caused partially by wind and partially by flood, again, you've got this in one policy. There is a little bit of a caveat here, is when you look at the pricing, pricing might be inflated as compared to the property market because you're including that flood and quake, those flood and quake perils. And so to get an apples for apples comparison, we typically ask our underwriters for 2 quotes. One with the same perils as the typical property policy, in other words, including wind, and then the second pricing, including the flood and quake. Generally speaking, it's not much of an upcharge for the flood and quake, but it's better to have an apples to apples comparison when you're looking at property versus stock throughput to exclude the flood and quake, at least in part of the pricing. Again, it replaces the stock element of property policy. Some stock throughput markets will even include the contents, the business, personal, property in the package. Not everybody can do that. That does vary from market to market. That again frees up capacity. So if you've got $1 million of stock and another $1 million of buildings coverage, now you're only going to the property market for that $1 million of building coverage. You're going to bring in some carriers that might have not been able to write the 2 or 3 or 4 million of total coverage, but they can write the $1 million building. There's certainly a perception that building risk is a better risk than the stock itself. So it could make it, again, a little bit more attractive to the traditional property markets that are in such chaos today. Rating, again, these are loss-rated policies typically. There's a deposit premium. They're going to look at the different exposures, the ocean cargo, the storage exposures. And then you can pretty well customize this to follow a rating that you want to. Most commonly, it's annual sales. So if sales go up, we expect shipments and stock to go up. So again, the rating could be on annual sales. The cargo section could be on value shipped. I've seen these done even on barrels. That was in case of oil. But you can really, as long as you have a measure of how things have grown, most underwriters are pretty flexible on how the rating appears. They've got their idea of pricing. They want X $1,000 for the price, but you can back that into sales, to value shipped, to virtually any metric that you can agree with the underwriters. So, pretty brief discussion about stock throughput.